A church is one of the oldest organizational types in the world. The concept of the local Christian church in particular has existed for approximately 2,000 years. Other religions have church histories going back much further than that. In light of that historical context, what does it mean for a church to be a 501c3, and does a church even need that status? Hi, I'm Greg McRae, founder and CEO of Foundation Group, and welcome to our 501c3 University channel. Today we're going to take a look at churches and 501c3 status and how all that goes together. Before we jump into churches specifically, though, I want to talk about nonprofits in general and their history in the U.S. The practice of charity and doing unto others, it's an ancient concept. The modern nonprofit organization, however, has a much shorter history. In the U.S., many consider the Peabody Education Fund as the first truly independent nonprofit organization, and it was started way back in 1867. As the Industrial Revolution drove our society into new arenas from the late 1800s through the mid-1900s, many other notable nonprofits, such as the American Red Cross, the Salvation Army, even the YMCA, got their starts. But even with those early examples, what we know today as the nonprofit sector, which represents a sizable part of the U.S. economic and service system, that only came to be in the early 1970s. There are approximately 2 million operating nonprofits in the U.S. today. In 1970, it was only a few thousand. So given the relative age difference between the church structure and the idea of a modern nonprofit, what does that mean for churches? Are they nonprofits? Should they be 501c3? Let's dig a little deeper. Without getting sidetracked on another topic altogether, it's worth pointing out that many people use the terms nonprofit, charity, and 501c3 as if they're interchangeable. Well, conversationally they may be. In practice, however, they're really not. While every 501c3 is a nonprofit, not every nonprofit is a 501c3. I could go on with other examples, but that's not really my point. What is a nonprofit? Legally, a nonprofit is an entity that is organized for a non-commercial purpose. It exists separately from the individuals who operate it, and to a lesser or greater degree depending on the entity structure chosen. No matter the legal structure, the key element is the non-commercial nature of its activities. A nonprofit is not conducting commerce for monetary gain. Yes, I know your cynicism meter just pegged off the charts, but what I'm talking about is how it's supposed to be, not the exceptions and excesses that just came to your mind. Operated properly, a nonprofit's programs and activities accomplish purposes and goals that are non-commercial in nature. A typical American church is a great example of an organization with activities that are non-commercial. Even in the occasional example where you might find a church that has some commerce, like a bookstore, something like that, the exercise and promotion of religion is really the primary activity. By definition, that's a non-commercial purpose, hence nonprofit nature of operations. So yes, a church is a nonprofit. Now that we've established that a church is a nonprofit, we must now answer the question of whether or not a church is a 501c3. And that answer is a little complicated. Section 501c3 of the U.S. Tax Code describes nonprofits that are charitable in nature. Organizations determined to be a 501c3 by the IRS are recognized as such because their purposes satisfy a limited scope allowable. We've covered this topic extensively before, but those purposes are religious, educational, scientific, literary, testing for public safety, amateur sports promotion, prevention of cruelty to animals and children, as well as purposes that are more generally charitable. As stated above, churches exist to exercise and promote religion, so they're inherently religious organizations. That's how they qualify to be 501c3s. For the vast majority of charities, the IRS will only recognize a nonprofit as a 501c3 when it applies for such recognition by filing Form 1023. And then that status is granted in the form of a determination letter. For churches, it works differently. By default, the U.S. government considers churches to be 501c3 organizations automatically, simply by virtue of existing. That is true regardless of corporate structure or lack thereof. For that reason alone, a church is generally a 501c3. Here's where the conversation starts getting a little more controversial. The question of whether or not a church should apply for 501c3 status inevitably comes up when people hear that churches are automatically considered to be a 501c3. If that's true, why bother filing Form 1023 and applying for IRS determination at all? It's a fair question. The lack of a determination letter doesn't imply a lesser 501c3 status. A church operating without IRS recognition is still tax exempt, and it's still able to provide its donors a tax-deductible donation receipt for gifts given. It has all the rights, privileges, and accountabilities of any other charity with a 501c3 determination letter. After all, a 501c3 is a 501c3. Or is it? Having personally worked with all kinds of nonprofits over the past 30 years, including many hundreds of churches, it is my professional opinion that all U.S. churches should seek and obtain IRS determination as a 501c3. Here's several reasons why. Reason number one, while rights and privileges are the same, there is a distinct difference between assumed status and official recognition. Churches operating under an assumed status, they've got the burden of proof that they are indeed satisfying the necessary requirements, while those with a determination letter have no such burden. Reason number two, taxpayers under audit who have their donations to your church challenged, they're at a distinct disadvantage if you do not have a determination letter. We've seen numerous situations where the tax deduction was disallowed by the IRS because the donor couldn't prove that the church was a qualifying charity. Remember, if you're operating under an assumed status, the IRS isn't even aware of your church. So reason number three, related to the last point, most donors expect your church to have a determination letter. And finally, reason number four, your church may find it difficult to obtain property tax exemption for its land and facilities without a determination letter. There's more that we could say on this and more we could add to the list, but we'll stop there for now. There is no shortage of pervasive myths in the nonprofit world, and one of the worst is the myth of the 508 free church. Websites abound that pitch this notion as an alternative to being a 501c3. Some who promote this myth are simply ignorant of the facts. Many others, however, are intentionally misleading people in the hopes that the victim will buy their book or hire them to set up their church as a free church. It's 100% total and complete garbage. And the pitch goes something like this. The government is evil. 501c3 status was created as a tool to put U.S. churches under the control of government, particularly the IRS. If you apply for and receive a determination letter, you have essentially ceded control of your church to the IRS, not God. Instead, you can organize as a 508 free church and still be tax exempt and not have any of the accountability to the IRS. The problem is, none of that is true. Well, maybe the part about the government being evil is true, but that's a completely different conversation. People who promote 508c free churches, at best they're ignorant, but most likely, sadly, they're grifters. Section 508 of the U.S. Tax Code, it's the part of the code that spells out how nonprofits go about applying for 501c3 status. 508c1a, that's the section that addresses the automatic recognition of churches as 501c3s. That's the very thing that I was talking about earlier. 508c is not a status of its own, and it certainly does not convey a lack of accountability to the IRS. And how ironic that these hucksters would attempt to use the U.S. tax code to undermine the U.S. tax code. It doesn't make any sense. It would be funny if it weren't so bad and so many were deceived by it all. The truth is, you could choose for your church to not be a 501c3, but it doesn't have anything at all to do with Section 508. If for some reason your church decides that you don't want to be a 501c3, you are simply deciding to be treated as a taxable for-profit business. Now, I can hear some of you saying right now, can we do that? Actually, you can. I don't necessarily recommend it, but I do respect some who have gone that route. 501c3 organizations do in fact have some limits on activity, especially where it involves campaigns for public office as well as commercial activities. A tiny handful of churches have decided to give up 501c3 status, along with its tax exemption and privileges and the ability to have donors give tax deductibly in order to do and to say pretty much whatever they want without regard to limits otherwise placed on charities. Is that the right thing for you to do? Is that the right choice for most churches? Probably not. The important point is that for a church to not be a 501c3, it is automatically choosing to be a taxable business. There's really no other way to say it. A U.S.-based church is, by definition, both a nonprofit and a 501c3 tax-exempt entity. Best practice is to solidify that standing by both incorporating at the state level and seeking official IRS determination as a 501c3. Hey, there's a lot of misinformation out there, so lead well and stay informed. Your congregation will definitely thank you for it. Well, that's all the time we have for today. If you liked this video, hit the like button below. It really helps us out. Plus, click the subscribe button to become a part of our channel here. And don't forget to click the little bell icon so you can be notified of new content when we post it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.